Hey friends, this is James again from PlasmAir, just doing a basic wick for the PlasmAir. I've stated in other videos before, I keep mine off the deck of the mod by using a little O-ring. I think it's about a number 00 from like Home Depot, pretty basic. Just fits nicely around the 510 connector. I do that for a couple reasons. One, because the original airflow set screw that I remove does still draw in air, so it kind of helps smooth out the air balance, the airflow. Again, I remove the traditional K-Fun Light Plus V2 airflow control screw, and that kind of lines up right with the original single 1.5 millimeter airflow hole. And when I add my holes, it comes to a total of 2.5 millimeters, and that's also with the addition of my center post. Also appropriate for me, coil height is essentially, you can see here, the bottom of the coil is right near the top of the deck head screws. May look like it's touching the screws, but that's just because the video can't resolve the gap. It's tight in there, but it's not touching, it doesn't short out. Essentially about, with my build, which is around a 3 millimeter mandrel, almost the same as one of these kinds of jeweler's screws, essentially 3 millimeters. Whenever I rewick, I kind of check the build, and I always tighten the deck screws, snug them up, because over time before I realized I'd start getting some shorting issues, and it was almost always because the deck screws had worked loose over time. But now every time I rewick, I just use the handy dandy tool, snug them up. I keep the mandrel in there because if it does happen to turn, it helps keep the coil you built in line nice and snug. And then I also double check the 510, holding the mandrel, so in case it does twist, that it doesn't screw your build up. Snug it, good to go. Double check one more time. All right, so we're ready to wick. Install it on my mod. And again, because I got the 510 there, I get a little bit of a gap, like I said, that helps draw air in and also keeps it from sweating liquid. And like I said before, I use the hex wrench to help get it where I want it. So always the air holes are facing the front of my device. Just take your wicking material. Again, because this PlasmAirFlo deck that I modified with CNC machine work, the original liquid channels to about twice the size, it wicks incredibly well. So you can use any viscosity liquid, but because of that, you have to build a really tight wick in there. So I get a good generous amount of wicking material. And you'll know you have the right amount of wicking material when, as you pull it, the mod will follow it. But you don't want it so tight that it wrenches your build off its axis. So over the years, I've just found a good happy place. I know exactly how much I'm putting in there. It's not always perfect. Sometimes I do get a little bit of flooding. It's always just wicking air. So I go back and forth a few times to kind of smash the wicking material down so it's not overly fluffy, because that hurts when you try to build. So more or less, the wick ends get trimmed to the edge of the atomizer base. You kind of just eyeball it from above. Have it nice and straight, ready to trim. Get your trimmers. Make sure the wick is in the build straight. can see from the top view, it's essentially just going to the edge of the atomizer. You essentially want to have just the very tip of the wicking material just touching the top of the build deck. You don't want to have it overhanging and all over these threads, or you can definitely crush the evap chamber in the plasma tank. So as you can see, it's just, if I push it down, it's just kind of kissing, what I call kissing the top. It's no more than 1 millimeter longer than the deck. It's about right. So then I'll get the other side, trim it. Kind of double check that. It's just a hair past, about 1 millimeter past this area. So it kind of protrudes a little tiniest amount into the liquid channel up at the top. But again, you don't want it hanging over these threads, or you're gonna break, you can break the inner evap chamber. This area right here, the evap chamber that's also Pyrex. So just double check. Better to triple check than have it too long and cause dry hits, or too short and cause flooding. Very fine balance. I do an unconventional wicking. I call it the TIE Fighter wick. You'll see why in a second. I kind of blow on the ends, straight on. So it's like that. And I learned from a old Vapor to set my wick into the build by slightly pulsing it and getting it to swell from the center. So just, again, light pulses, some wick liquid on the coil, just till it starts to heat up. Flip it to the other side, couple pulses, then I'll blow it again. Get it to fan out. Couple more pulses. So that helps make your wick last a little longer, reduces dry hits by setting the wick from the inside of the coil out, not laying liquid on the ends of your wick, which is pretty traditional. Then I kind of make sure I'm right in the middle, and I lightly brush over towards the center of the coil, and that helps put it into the plasma tank. So there you can kind of see why I call it TIE Fighter wick. Very unconventional. It just seems to be what's worked best for me. And you can see again that the wick is really not hanging over the top of the deck. It's just touching the very edge, just a millimeter, if even that. Any longer and you run into danger of breaking the evap chamber, and you can tell when you're putting it back together. So essentially I usually I just kind of, since it's brushed over like that, just easily goes right into the center. And I back thread it till I hear it click. And I kind of scooch it back and forth so you can see the wick is centering itself. If you feel any weird resistance or hear a squeaking or grinding, then you know you might be hitting the inside of your evap. So to back off and realign it and check it. Don't force it. It goes really easy. So then I just hold it now that it's snug. Do the final gripping the trim ring that's attached to the plasma tank, because you don't want to wrench it at the tank because you could separate it from the trim ring. Just kind of wrench it tight, make sure I'm in position. on the puffs. Good to go. Another day or two before I got to rewick. Thanks.